From Eval Academy, it's Evaluation Conversations, a series about evaluation. What is it? What isn't it? How is it done? But most importantly, how can it make a difference in our world? I'm Kristy Madsen, co-founder of 3Hive Consulting and Eval Academy. On today's first episode, I'm talking with Joanne Currie and Allan Undheim of the United Way Capital Region. The United Way is a well-known organization. It funds many different programs and initiatives. But in this episode, we wanted to explore evaluation use from that funder perspective and what their take is when it comes to using evaluation data to generate insights and drive meaningful change. The reason that I asked you both here today was because we want to conduct a series of recorded interviews with leaders who are working in the nonprofit sector to, explore evaluation as a driver for change and why the data really around effective evaluation use is showing that it's not being used as effectively or efficiently as it could. And so, we know that organizations now have more information than they've ever had before. And I shared an article with you recently from the Stanford Social Innovation Review that talked about, even though we have this plethora of information, when that evidence is available, it's rarely being used as effectively as it can to improve outcomes. And so we wanted to kind of explore that topic with the both of you and get your opinion on whether in fact that is the case from your perspective. And if so, why is that the case? So I guess before we jump into it, I'll get each of you maybe to introduce yourself, the organization that you work for, and your role within that organization. So, Joanne, let's start with you.
Okay. My name's Joanne Currie. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives with the Community Building Investment Team. And we work for the United Way of the Alberta Capital Region.
Yeah, and so I'm Allan Undheim, and I am the Vice President of our Community Building and Investment Team with United Way of the Alberta Capital Region, and I've been with the organization now not quite as long as Joanne, but about 12 years.
Great, thank you. So I guess my first question to both of you then is, obviously, the United Way funds a number of programs and initiatives in the region. Do you have any sort of overarching approach or strategy when it comes to evaluation and learning? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, Joanne, I guess I can start. I think it's obviously very important to us as an organization to understand the impact of our investments, whether we're making those investments in support of programs or we're making them in support of strategic initiatives, which I'm sure Joanne will talk about as she's quite connected to a couple of those. And so we try to set up as much as we can at the outset what the expectations are of those who are receiving the funds, delivering the programs, what it is that, and we try to understand from them what it is they're trying to achieve. And we base our funding to some extent on the quality of what they're hoping to do and achieve. And then we try to understand the results that they have on an annual basis. And so that just helps all of us as a funder for sure, but the agencies as well, to know whether or not the programs are working to the extent that they need to work. And so that helps us in terms of shaping what investments we make, especially with the dollars we have full discretion over. We can choose to put those wherever they need to go. But it also helps us in terms of reporting back to the many donors that support our organization to be able to say, with your dollars, these are the kinds of results that we've been able to achieve. And with respect to strategic initiatives, and maybe I can hand it over to you, Joanne, I know that we try to set up evaluation right at the outset. So it's a part of even the development of the initiative itself. The evaluators are at the table, but maybe I can hand it over to you and you can speak to that specifically.
Sure. A couple of the initiatives that I've been involved with have had an evaluation right from the beginning of the program. And actually one of them, Empower You as an example, we had funding for evaluation before we had funding for the rest of the initiative. And that was in 2012. So we're heading into our 10th year of that initiative. And evaluation has been part of our structure from the beginning. And our external evaluator has been at the table at every meeting, been part of the decision-making planning with the collaborative to establish an evaluation framework, and then to integrate those measures into the work itself with facilitators, with organizations, right to the governance, which is leadership committee. And then evaluation with Communities United has involved 3Hive, as you know, and CUP, Community University Partnership. And so we've been very fortunate to have, again, that evaluation expertise right in the mix of the evaluation of the initiative throughout the entire initiative. It really helps frame what we're up to, question what we're doing and how we're doing it, and where do we go next.
Mm-hmm.
So why was that? Why did you have funding for the evaluation before the entire project? How did that happen?
We knew the value of evaluation. The goal of Empower You as a collaborative, we didn't have a coordinated effort around match savings and financial literacy back in the day. At that time, there was lots of work happening in the US, some work happening in Canada around match savings. And we knew that if we wanted to scale up the work, we needed to evaluate the effectiveness of bringing all these collaborative partners together. So now we have about 15, we do have and always have had about 15 to 16 partners at this collaborative table, and we have a joint program model, a joint evaluation, joint funding model, and we knew that if we got together, we had to evaluate how it was working as a collective versus each individual organization doing their own thing. Mm-hmm. And so that evaluation was critical to even proving that this worked and that this was an effective way to fund, to program, and to evaluate.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So you mentioned you had an external evaluator, and you mentioned us working on the Communities United evaluation, and we were external, which kind of leads into my next question, which is from an operations perspective. Do you have any sort of internal evaluation expertise or capacity building that happens internally within the United Way?
Yeah, we do. So even within the community building and investment team, we have a director that oversees evaluation. Essentially, it's the stewardship of our dollars, and so that's the reporting that we receive, the reports that are generated from the reporting we get from the agencies, the holding the agencies accountable for the results that they've specified they were going to achieve. So there's a lot of that within our team. We have a couple of people actually set up to do that in particular. And then we also have right across our value chain, right across, right through to our customer side, the donor side, we need people on that side of the organization also to be able to communicate the results that we generate in the community, to be able to share that in community through our even marketing communications department, through social media. So it's generated by our partners, and then it's communicated right across organization and then outward to make sure that everyone understands the work we're involved with and the results we're striving towards, because that ultimately helps us, being United Way, helps us generate more resources to be able to support more work, which is ultimately what we want to be doing.
Right. So it sounds to me like the United Way actually places quite a bit of value on evaluation. And so I am curious to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the article that I mentioned. And I don't know if either of you had a chance to read that article. It's called Smart Decision Making, and it was published by the Stanford Social Innovation Review. And, basically they were talking about how more than 3/4 of foundations who were surveyed had difficulty commissioning evaluations that resulted in any sort of useful lessons or meaningful insights for the foundation, the grantees, or the field. So I'm kind of curious what your thoughts were on that, and if there was any sort of elements that resonated with you.
Joanne, do you want to start this one?
Sure. Thanks, Allan. My initial thought around this was that Yes, sometimes it's challenging for organizations to take evaluation and then put it into work, really, or put it to work to move forward. And my initial reaction to that is organizations might not have the capacity to take that evaluation and integrate it into the work. They might not have the resources to continue the work, to move it forward. What I really liked about the Stanford review document was around they set the stage for why it's often not used or why evaluation isn't used, those typical reasons. But what I really liked was some of the pieces that said, okay, this is true, and here's a framework that could add to and make it more successful to incorporate evaluation into your work. And so the points that I really liked about that document were that it talked about that research and evaluation answer questions about the past and the present, and decisions are about predictions of what's going to happen in the future. I hadn't thought of that before, and I think that's really a great point. And that decision questions are different from evaluation questions, and I think that's really important to note. I really like the example they gave around should we renew this grant for this initiative? And that's a question we come across all the time. And what it takes into account is that you need to actually look at many different aspects, not just the evaluation, but take into account other things in order to make those decisions. And then I think what it reinforced for me is looking at and separating evaluation teams from decision making or program teams and incorporating the two. And I think that's what United Way's been able to do is, as Allan said, we do have a team that's dedicated to that stewardship of and bringing our evaluation work, and it's amalgamated with our program team that looks at and works with the agencies that do the programming. So that's just a couple of thoughts that I have around that.
Yeah, and so just to add to that, I think that when it comes to some of the things that struck me as I read the article was the value. So there's evidence out there, there's research out there, there's evaluators out there. It's not being potentially used to as great effect as maybe we would all like. At the same time, there's the value to the agency, the process use of doing evaluation, and then there's a value to their stakeholders and value to the funders. And I think that those all sort of have to line up for an agency. If there's value across the board, then getting them to do it is pretty simple, provided that they have the time, the capacity, the mandate, the dollars, the resources to be able to do it, and the expertise to be able to understand the results at the end of it. We talked in the article about the fact that they lack capacity to maybe even understand the data to the extent that you can make good decisions based on it, because it does require some analysis that maybe those delivering those programs may not have. Organizations are, especially in the not-for-profit sector, they're lean. You run with what you need in order to deliver on your mission, and in some cases, the capacity to be able to incorporate that skill set of evaluation just isn't there, and you don't have the dollars. Maybe not from the funders, or maybe not of your unrestricted dollars that you have full discretion over. You don't have the mandate from your board or whomever to be able to put that towards evaluation. You just need to do more services because the demand is so great. And so I don't think it has much to do with the will of the people running the programs. Or apathy. Apathy was noted in the article. I think it's just capacity and mandate to do it from a variety of stakeholders. And then there's another piece that was referenced there, that if we all had full latitude over the dollars and could just make decisions based on that, then that's great. There's a whole bunch of other factors that influence what organizations do. There's the public perception of the work you do. There's the ability to translate what you do into the community. I think a lot of what we do, so we have evaluation, we do a lot of work around that, but we also have to put a lot of effort into translating that to potential donors and customers who really don't understand the nuts and bolts. They just want to feed a child in a school lunch, or they just want to provide, financial literacy training to a single parent mom. Like, I think there's a translation element that's required, and sometimes when you're just finite resources, you're trying to get the work done, you're trying to generate support, you just go to what will generate that support first, without fully immersing yourselves in the evaluative process to get better results. So.
Right. Yeah. No, yeah, you mentioned a lot there, Allan, in terms of some of those factors that may be playing into how effectively, some evidence or information is used. Joanne, do you have anything else to kind of add to that at all?
I was just going to say that sometimes evaluations are done so differently across organizations as well, that sometimes it's apples to oranges when comparing them. If you were doing one form of evaluation across all programs, it'd be interesting to see what you would land on. But we fund over 100 programs across 50 organizations that all use different methods of evaluation. And so it's so interesting, and evaluations do look so different. I'm involved with several where they just are not the same. And so how you use those also looks different, and the information you gather. And again, the expertise to analyze that data and bring it back to the group. I think the most important thing is to not just do evaluation for funders. I think that's often what the misunderstanding is, we're doing this for the funder. I think when evaluations work the best, it's when that organization is committed to taking the information from the evaluation and utilizing it in the initiative going forward. And I know I can say with confidence that with Empower You as an example, every year that evaluation reveals something new and different. And we take that information, we immediately share it with our facilitators, our initiative leadership, our stakeholders, and we look at how can we do better next year, because that's kind of what areas can we improve on. And I'll give you an example. The first year of the match savings program, we found that people were taking money out of their food budget to do match savings, and therefore they were food insecure. They didn't have enough food in their homes. These are families with low income. That was never the intent of this financial literacy match savings program, was for people to take from their food budgets. And whereas that's the only discretionary funds they might have. So what we did was made sure that we incorporated food security as part of the initiative moving forward. We looked at basic shelf programs. We talked to the food bank about partnerships for agencies to ensure that families, collective kitchens, to ensure that families were food secure first, and then match savings came after. And so we did learn from that. We also learned that participants in the program, initially it started as just for women. Women in the program were saying, hey, my spouse or my partner actually really needs this information. So we added a group for men. And so whereas that wasn't the initial intent, or it's not the primary focus of the program, we started a group. We invited another organization, Norwood, that focuses on families, to add a group for men that all the women in the program could access for their partners, and it could be couples and men in that initiative, so that they could learn alongside their partners. So again, we learned from the evaluation specifically, and then we incorporated it in the following year.
Mm-hmm. Which I definitely felt working on the Communities United evaluation too, was that oftentimes in evaluation there's like this push-pull between accountability requirements and then learning, and often funders are like, we need to show success, and that's like this unrealistic actually expectation often with a lot of these kind of complex initiatives and collaboratives and things like that. But I felt working on the Communities United evaluation that it was very flexible, and that the focus wasn't necessarily on show success. It was, okay, what are you learning? How can we improve and modify things over time? So I'm kind of curious then, from both of your perspectives, has that approach and that mindset kind of changed and evolved over time?
I think it has on some level. I think there's always that pressure to be able to answer the questions that your funder has asked you to answer. And so in the case of Communities United, we have a couple of key funders that have some specific questions that we had to make sure we answered through the course of running the initiative. And so some of that is certainly dictated to some extent by the investors who are involved. And for sure, that makes perfect sense. And in most every case, there is significant overlap between what we're trying to achieve in community and creating change and what the funders want. So you just try to find a way to create that common understanding based on what you're doing and to be able to share that back. I think it has evolved. One of the challenges, and it kind of goes back to the article again a little bit as well, is just the long-term nature of evaluation, the commitment long-term. In order to really like the stuff that Joanne's talked about and how it's changed and evolved over time, that's through evaluating every year over a long period of time. There's a cost to that. There's an energy that goes into that, and there needs to be a will on behalf of those who are investing in the initiative to be able to support evaluation over long periods of time, to be able to understand, because ultimately we want to measure change, like the change that happened, not just a point in time or a benchmark. You want to measure what changes over time for people. And so that requires a real commitment on behalf of the organization, the funders, the participants. I mean, there's a perceived imposition on those that actually benefit from their program or service to participate in, as well as some of the barriers around confidentiality, those kinds of things. There's lots of factors there, a lot of energy that needs to go into doing an appropriate evaluation, which we all know has to happen for it to be effective, to be able to understand longer term results. But at the same time, it creates considerable strain on organizations who have limited resources, both HR and money, as well as knowledge capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially now too with COVID. I'm sure that's impacting resources, of course, and people's ability to kind of collect data and allocate time and resource to that. But do you have any comments on that at all, or the current situation and how that's impacting?
For sure, even just with our existing agreements that we have with our programs, that we have, of course, agreements with everyone that we fund, and there are expectations attached to those agreements. Programs will be delivered a certain way for a certain number of people in a certain format over a period of time. And when the pandemic hit, the requirement to work differently, to find different ways to support those that rely on your programs and services. So we've had to sort of step back, take the lead of those who are delivering the service, and have them inform us what will work in this case. Because ultimately, it's about trying to get services to people. It may be done remotely, it may be done virtually, versus in groups or individually, so in person. So I think we've had to be really flexible. And so there's that as from the point of view of a funder, as well as from the point of view of an agency. Just you're having to deliver programs differently, services differently. There's a different kind of urgency connected to some of the services. You've added some services that you maybe didn't do because the people have a relationship with you as an agency. So all of a sudden now you're providing food hampers, whereas that wasn't your core business before. But ultimately you're trying to support those that rely on you as well as you can, and then partner with others and get other organizations involved to the degree possible. But it's throwing everything sort of off kilter a little bit. And what's been incredibly impressive is just how resilient, how resourceful our partners have been, and the sector has been in trying to support people in new and innovative ways. And so I think that's been great, and we're trying to learn from that as an organization that works with and supports these agencies in terms of what works. But yeah, it's changed a lot of things, as well as, of course, things like capacity for people. Some organizations that they're not getting the same fundraising dollars they used to. They couldn't have their own special events, so they have less dollars. What supports their evaluation efforts are their unrestricted dollars that they fundraise on their own or that they get directly from a funder. But if those are compromised in some way, what ability do they have? They don't have as much money to be able to throw at stuff they know is incredibly important, like evaluation. And so that's a factor for sure.
Right. Yeah.
I think also the way that we do evaluation has shifted in that even this past year, our emphasis, again, I'm sorry to keep using Empower You as an example, but Empower You took on deepening our evaluation. And so we took a team of people from Empower You, and that was facilitators, leaders, evaluator, a group of 7 to actually take on the Steve Patty Project impact work to take a deeper dive at our evaluation. And so the intent of that was also to add interviews with former participants of Empower You. And so they actually had to do them via Zoom versus the in-person that they might typically do, or the focus group. Even the meetings to coordinate and plan the evaluation had to take a different look. They were meant to be done in a room together and gathering trends and analysis and that kind of thing. And they had to do it separately and through virtual means. And so it shifted the whole way the project had to go in this deeper dive in the evaluation. But man, they committed to it and they took it on and they did it beautifully. And actually were able to pull from the recordings with the permission of the participants, of course, and get some great interviews and to be able to listen and hear the stories directly from the participants, which was great and very powerful. So agencies had to shift the way we did evaluation or way we took on this project. And now we're going to take that deeper dive that we did this past year, add it to our former evaluation, tweak it, adjust it. What can we do next year? And we're implementing an evaluation advisory committee as well. So we just continue to grow and develop an evaluation to grow with the initiative. So it's really, we always use that evaluation lens with the program lens, and it really is beneficial for everybody, I believe. It's hard work though, Matt. The commitment it takes from the agencies and the facilitators who have to often reach out, connect with those participants, do pre and post surveys, do assessment, use assessment tools with participants. Participants just want to have they want to have a good program. They want to benefit themselves. They don't always, and rightly so, they don't always care about these evaluation tools, and facilitators bring it across in a way this is for the benefit of the initiative overall, so we can learn and develop.
So Joanne, I think it's good that you're digging into Empower You, because you could, whether it's Empower You or whether it's All In for Youth, Mental Health Action Plan, Communities United, the list goes on. That's a specific example, but you could apply that example across the board, just the evolution of evaluation, trying to adjust programming based on what you learn from the evaluation process to make it better, to impact different people differently, and to create greater change over time. So I think that the deeper dive into Empower You is really can be sort of extrapolated across other initiatives and programs that we support where they have that sort of rigor around their evaluation process.
Mm-hmm. And again, because they're done so differently, this is a challenge that I have. The evaluation for Empower You is very different from the evaluation for Communities United, as an example. And so how do you compare those two processes? And I don't know the answer to that. And are both the same value? Like I see them as both being very valuable, but it's again comparing apples to oranges, perhaps. And I'd like somebody to tell me what's the most valuable, but I don't think they would.
Well, one of the things I noted here is there needs to be variability in terms of how the evaluation process works. Ultimately, the outcomes to understand whether you're achieving your outcomes and how that's working. And the evaluative process, and this may come up later, Kristy, in our conversation, but it's just the flexibility required to work with the various initiatives. And I think of the specific example with Communities United, it started looking very differently than it is today. And just because, it was about trying to get underneath what is this initiative really doing. There were the sort of pressures to try to answer some specific questions, but a recognition that what was happening was really great, and it was achieving great outcomes and was answering the questions in a bit of a different way, or answering some different questions. And so it evolved over time, given the type of work we were doing and the evolution of the initiative itself. And so I think there has to be that built-in flexibility in terms of approach, that consultative approach, in order to make sure it's as effective as possible for those that are requiring the evaluation to take place.
I'm curious, Joanne, because you've talked about a really good evaluation experience, but I'm sure you've had some not so good evaluation experiences too. And I'm just curious what you think are some of the reasons or factors that kind of played into not having as useful or as good of an experience as, say, you're having with the Empower You evaluation.
I honestly can't say that I've ever had a bad experience with evaluation, because to me, it's always learning. I may not have always understood to the degree that I would like from an academic perspective. Like, that's for me personally, I've grown in that area because of the expertise that many evaluators have brought to the table. So sometimes could be challenging to wrap my head around the data or the evaluation process. To me, that's the most challenging, but that's not a negative. It's how do you learn best practices, different evaluation models. I can think of, and it keeps popping into my head, before I worked for United Way, so over 14 years ago, I want to say even 20 years ago, I worked for a United Way agency. Well, I've worked for several, but a United Way agency specifically. And United Way brought in an expert, or allowed us to utilize an expert, Deborah Morrison at the time, to go through logic models and evaluation. And that was really important for United Way 20 years ago. And they started sharing this expertise and asking agencies to look themselves at evaluation, their outcomes, their outputs, all that. And I remember having our teams internally at Norwood struggling to wrap their heads around outputs versus outcomes and impacts and all the language around evaluation. And so for me at that time, that was the challenge. And so that wasn't so much the evaluation's bad. It's just, how do we learn about evaluation and incorporate it into our world?
Yeah.
And then how do we demonstrate that we're doing good work? Like, because again, I was more in a manager of an organization than wanting to demonstrate with the good work we knew was happening. But how do you do that through evaluation? Like, how does it complement each other? Mm-hmm. And so for me, that was the biggest challenge back then. But I've been a part of Vibrant Communities Evaluation, Tamarack Institute, Mark Cabage work, Communities United, Families First with CUP. Again, great learning from all these evaluations. I can't say I've ever had a bad experience with evaluation, because it's always just learning and incorporating what you're learning to the work that's being done. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't say.
I think that's maybe a rarity, though, unfortunately.
Really, I don't know. I'm not.
Well, evaluation does have a really bad rap, as being like this kind of make work project that you're only doing to kind of like check the box type thing, and that it's not a useful process. So I think that's great that you don't have that perspective, and maybe it's because you had that learning early on, or that capacity building that was kind of built in. So that's interesting.
I think just to add to that, and not to give any specific examples, but when the nature of the evaluation is too top down, too funder driven, then without giving voice to those who are benefiting from the service and the agencies that are delivering the service and trying to find that common ground, I think then it becomes a bad experience. Then it becomes a thing that agencies have to do for funders. They need these boxes checked, even though the practicality of the information is no use to us. It's just, we're just doing it for them. And I think that over time, especially in Edmonton, I think there's been a huge evolution of evaluation and the perception of evaluation, notwithstanding the other barriers, capacity, dollars, etc. But I think Common Outcomes Initiative, for instance, is one where they've really done a great job of engaging the agencies who've been engaging those that benefit from their services to understand what the indicators need to be, what are the things we're evaluating across systems. So whether it's the United Way or the city, used to be Children's Services with the province as well. So I think that what you're doing is you're engaging them as experts who are delivering the services to help us understand what it is we need to be understanding and measuring, and how we're going to understand whether there's been results achieved. And so I think that evaluation becomes more effective if you can ground it in practice and ground it in those that are being supported, and been agencies believe in it, and they can see how the process use of the evaluation information for how they deliver the services. If they feel that their recommendations in terms of what they're learning as agencies who are front line are being heard by those that are supporting it, then it becomes very effective, and it becomes a partnership where everyone's kind of trying to understand and learn together, just like Joanne talked about. And that's very clear in the initiatives, I think, where you're sitting alongside, and we have evaluators right with us step by step. And it's becoming more clear in situations where you're funding an array of programs and services, and trying to take the time to learn from them, having them inform what needs to be delivered and what the outcomes need to be, and validating that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that speaks to a couple of that points in that article, to getting back to that, right? Where it's, don't treat decisions as their handoffs. Like, evaluators shouldn't be doing that, right? It should be that evaluators are kind of at the table, they're more informed of what those decisions are, and then are better able to link it. And
Right.
Yeah, so that's key for sure. Yeah.
I think sometimes the challenge too might be that we have some initiatives that there's not a need for a deep dive into evaluation. It could be a very simple give people food they eat, or do a financial literacy workshop and they have more information. But sometimes people put a lot of weight on, like, are you changing the world with this 2-hour workshop? And it's like, and we've had to say, actually, no, we're not. It's a really important part. It's an entry point to something bigger and deeper, but it's really one piece of a larger puzzle. And we're not going to make the connection actually to saving this person's financial everything based on a 2-hour workshop they attended, or an 1.5-hour workshop. So sometimes it's challenging because people, groups, funders, organizations, donors might have this really high expectation of measuring the success of an initiative, when really it's just part of a bigger piece of a bigger puzzle.
Right.
That's where the evidence-based practice becomes really, really helpful. So feeding a child a nutritious breakfast or lunch, we know has academic impact, and we know over time that will improve their likelihood of having success in school and ultimately completing school. And so there's the being able to take a specific type of intervention that you're supporting and be able to draw the link to a longer term outcome that's well into the future. That 2-hour workshop is not changing their world in that point in time, but it's impacting their decisions that they're going to make for their lifetime. So, and that's hard to be able to demonstrate in 1 year or in one workshop. But if you base it in evidence and you ground it in evidence, there's evidence out there, just as this article talks about. There's a whole bunch of it out there. Taking the time to be able to distill it, apply it to what you're doing, and be able to communicate that message out as to how that one specific intervention will have a long-term impact. Without following that child through 12 years of school, being able to take a picture of their high school diploma and say, that nutritious lunch we gave them back in grade 2 led to this. You have to rely on evidence at some point.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and that gets back to what Joanne was talking about laying out the theory of change for your program or your initiative, and having an understanding of, how is it that you're going to do this and it's going to lead to this, and what are some of those underlying assumptions or theories or evidence that can inform that, and everyone kind of being on the same page and aligned with that. Yeah.
I think too, there's different, the expertise, even theory of change, like the language. People need to understand or have a better understanding. They need to be taught, I think, myself especially, needs to be explained what all those pieces mean in evaluation. And so for me, it's been really helpful when I've been part of evaluations where I can just say, could you explain this in a more layperson kind of way? Because the academic evaluation lens is sometimes really above a lot of folks' heads. And I think that's just reality. If you have experts in any area, you'll need to actually explain it in a way that's useful for people in different ways or with different backgrounds. So, and sometimes different funders have different expectations for evaluation. So even the same program, they might get funded, and we see many of these were funded by many funders, several funders funding the same initiative, but all those funders have different expectations of evaluation and measurement. And so that is the challenge. And that is the beauty of Common Outcomes as an example, where they're trying to coordinate what they're asking for in results. Because without that, we know that agencies are overwrought and overwhelmed with the sheer volume of information and feedback that funders do want in different areas. So if that could be coordinated, that would be a beautiful thing. Or for example, with Empower You, one of the beautiful things that we have is, for the most part, we do one evaluation, we tweak it, work with it ongoing, and then we actually provide that evaluation in a presentation to all the funders and stakeholders at once. And that's lovely. And that's really shows commitment and understanding from the funders that, hey, that's good enough for us, like to provide all the same information to us versus one-offs all the time. Here's 3 different reporting pieces that you need at 3 different times of the year to different funders. That coordinated response is really helpful.
Right. One of the things I was thinking about, Joanne, when you were talking was kind of getting back to that article and what we talked about earlier, which was evaluation is looking retrospectively and answering, what did we do? How did we do it? What did we learn from it? But oftentimes there's a struggle making the link to like the forward facing and the so what. Now, how do we link this to decisions? So can you talk a little bit about that? And like, say, for instance, there's a presentation back to funders and there's lots of recommendations in the report, but what does that process look like afterwards, taking those recommendations and you know, implementing them or not? What does that look like?
Well, again, we've been really fortunate in that we've had funders that do question the evaluation. They ask questions. So they don't necessarily question the evaluation, they ask more questions. And so we've had funders that have said, actually, we'd like you to do a deeper dive on evaluation. And we did. So when they ask questions and they request and they might say, actually, we're not going to keep funding unless we get some more answers to these types of questions, and then we'll ask those types of questions. Right. Because it's really all the thoughts around the table that contribute to us. Like sometimes when you're in it, that outside perspective is helpful. And if a funder wants and needs to know more, let's say longitudinal discussion or interviews with participants, that's what we were able to do this year. So for example, we've talked about it for many years, but it was when a funder said, actually, I'd like to see a little more of that, the anecdotal, the stories, the longitudinal stories, that we did it. We said, okay, let's do it. We did 30 some interviews with participants from the past, and then we move forward integrating that into the future work. So I think those questions are always good, and we'll take them, and then we'll look at how do we incorporate that. Does that answer your question?
Yep, it does. Do you have anything to add, Allan?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. Well, I know we're kind of running over time here. So anything else to add when you're thinking about what's maybe helpful when it comes to, you know, bridging that, sometimes that disconnect between the knowledge and action cycle? Is there anything that kind of comes to mind that's helpful from, you know, when thinking about what evaluators can do, or even what organizations or agencies can do? Anything that comes to mind?
For me, I think funding the capacity to do this work. When I said we took a deeper dive, as an example, with Empower You, it was funded by Stollery Charitable Foundation. They said, okay, we'll fund. It was another funder that was asking for that deeper dive, but they stepped up and said, hey, we'll cover the cost of this additional training, additional capacity building for organizations that need that capacity. And that created the window of opportunity for us to take that deeper dive. And so without that capacity, that financial support for organizations to do that work, it doesn't necessarily work. We wouldn't be able to create it with nothing.
Right.
And I think that's whoever's asking for more, they have to understand also we need the support financially. And I say that from organizations that are running frontline, doing the hard work with community. They need the capacity to be able to add to their plates. And that's evaluation. Evaluation is adding and complementing, but it's work to incorporate. So they need to free up something on their plate to do that work, and they need the capacity to be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I think that in the case that Joanne talked about in specific initiatives, we generally have funders, whether it's various levels of government or foundations that work with us, partner with us, that have an understanding of the value of evaluation and support it. I think that what's really tricky for us is trying to raise money for it from the donor base and community, because they see that as administratively heavy. It is not as an essential. We just want to make sure the service is provided. And so trying to make the case for the value of competent individuals delivering programs and services, having evaluation incorporated into it, the robustness of the service, not just the specific point in time services, is sometimes tricky. And so we're continually trying to share that messaging, sharing the results that we're able to achieve. And we put our own dollars to support it. We have infrastructure organizationally, operationally to support it. But at the same time, it's unfortunately not seen as a requirement on behalf of community as a whole, that capacity be supported financially to be able to do these kinds of things. And so I think we're always walking that, trying to balance delivering the service, but at the same time, delivering it the right way and learning from the experience.
Right. Yeah. Which I guess is a good way to kind of wrap up. And that's one of the reasons why we started Eval Academy, is because evaluation is such a unknown field and profession. When you speak to someone about, I'm an evaluator, no one has any idea of what that means.
Right.
And so that's a challenge, right? To your point, getting people on board to fund something that they really don't maybe have a good understanding of and the value of it. So hence why we're trying to put some knowledge out there as to what evaluation is and what it can do to help advance change within organizations and, broadly in society. So anyways, thank you so much. I could chat with you guys all day and pick your brain, but I'll let you get back to doing the work. And thanks so much.
Thanks, Kristy.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye.